Good afternoon and good morning for those of you on the West Coast. My name is Brian Spiro and I am with IntelliChief. I'd like to welcome everyone today to our web presentation titled Best Practices for Touchless Accounts Payable Automation in J.D. Edwards. This webinar is being brought to you not only by us here at IntelliChief, but also through our friends at Quest. So thank you very much for joining. For those of you in the Northeast, hopefully you're all shoveled out from the snow. Before we get started today, at the end of the session, skipping right to the end, at the end of the session, there'll be some time for Q&A. So if you want to submit a question at any point in time, you can do so through the GoToWebinar questions panel. Just type your question in there and send it. And at the end, I'll have a chance to look at those and answer as many as I can. The session is being recorded today as well, so if anyone on your team wasn't able to join you and you want to forward the link to the recording to them, you'll be able to do that. So let's talk about the agenda, or let's take a look at the agenda today. This is going to be sort of a whirlwind tour. We want to try and keep this to 30 minutes as best as possible. So I'm going to set us a baseline just by giving you a little bit of a profile as to who we are here at IntelliChief and the type of solution that we offer to J.D. Edwards customers. Then we'll dive right into automating your AP process. We'll talk about some goals for AP automation that might be common amongst many organizations and others maybe a little unique. We'll talk about how you would automate the AP process with IntelliChief. We'll then go into some J.D. Edwards integration points to give you a feel for how IntelliChief is integrated with J.D. Edwards, give you some things to think about, and we'll wrap it up with next steps and any questions. So what is the IntelliChief solution? Let's start with that. IntelliChief is considered an enterprise content management system, right? And that's important because really what it's going to allow you to do is manage all of your content, not just in accounts payable. Certainly you can use it for that, but you have an opportunity with IntelliChief as a platform to automate other business processes and other departments that are document-centric and really leverage a solution like this to manage the life cycle of all of that content throughout the organization. And where it makes sense, have certain integration points between IntelliChief and J.D. Edwards, or maybe IntelliChief and other applications that you might use there. So we're going to talk today about accounts payable, and of course that can broaden out into the larger purchase-to-pay process. But, you know, IntelliChief can be used for sales order automation. If you are a manufacturer or a distributor running J.D. Edwards, you can use IntelliChief to create sales orders out of your inbound customer purchase orders. You can use it for accounts receivable automation and cash application. The human resources team can use IntelliChief as an electronic employee file to give you an idea. So enterprise-wide, but today's focus, of course, is accounts payable. A little bit about a company profile for IntelliChief. We are a U.S.-based company. We have 2 physical locations and then a number of remote employees. Our world headquarters is down in Tampa, Florida, where it did not snow overnight. And for those of us in the Massachusetts office, in our North American headquarters, Mansfield, Massachusetts, which is just a little south of Boston, we are an Oracle Gold partner. And I mention that because it all means integration, right? That's the value to you as a J.D. Edwards customer and us having this relationship, not just that we bring you information through Quest or you see us at Collaborate or at the various regional user groups for J.D. Edwards, but that we've invested in this relationship to develop an integration. We've got hundreds of customers globally of all industries, from manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, retail, construction, and I make mention of that to give you the comfort level, right? We've done this before hundreds of times. As we look in the slide, some J.D. Edwards customers here. If you're out on the West Coast, you might know of Emser Tile, Wilbur Curtis. For those of you Northern California or a little further north, Mann Packing. We're doing some new projects right now at Suave Enterprises and Woodside Homes. MYR Group is a new customer. Matco Tools has been a long-time customer using IntelliChief with J.D. Edwards. So a lot of customers that we draw on experience to bring best practices to the table for our customers as we implement the solution. So with that being said, let's talk about AP and dive into some of the details. You may be on this call today because you've already identified some goals for yourself and for your department around automating accounts payable. Maybe you haven't given too much thought about it and you want to hear what other people are looking for or what other people are trying to accomplish. So I think that with all of these various goals, we'll just cherry pick a couple and talk about them. But there are some common threads, I think, across a lot of organizations. And a lot of times it starts in that upper left-hand corner box. You've got an accounts payable team that spends a great amount of time manually touching invoices. And at the front and center of that is manually entering invoice data into JD Edwards to create the voucher, right? So a lot of companies are looking to greatly reduce the amount of time the staff spends doing that and refocus them on more value-added tasks, if not eliminate that data entry altogether. I skip down to the lower left, just that word automate, right? Automate the process, focus on the exceptions. Then you get into some of the tactical benefits of the solution, like eliminating duplicate payments as a result of the system being able to catch duplicate invoices. Realizing this concept of straight-through processing, you'll hear that a lot, right? Those are the invoices that get sent to you from your supplier. They get automatically entered in JD Edwards. There's no in between. There's no end user touching those invoices at all. So straight through from supplier into JD Edwards. That's where you really leverage automation. If you're able to process invoices faster, you're able to maximize your opportunity for taking any early pay discounts that your suppliers might offer you. So I would ask you to do some research. Are you taking advantage of all of those early pay discounts if they're being offered? Increased process visibility, of course, in the time of COVID, right? In the lower right there, business continuity. We did another webinar last week with an existing customer who talked at great length about how accounts payable has benefited from IntelliChief and that they were able to work remotely, work from anywhere, process invoices, and not being hamstrung by having to go into the office and having to do all the manual touches. So good information up on that slide. Again, hopefully a lot of that resonates with you. As you think about, okay, well, we want to do AP automation. We know we're going to have to put a business case together. We can talk about why accounts payable automation now with some statistics. You can go out and look at various industry studies. These numbers here are from Aberdeen. There's a lot out there. You can go Google it. But when Aberdeen does analysis for AP automation, they take the organizations, they classify them into the best-in-class AP organizations, right? The ones that are fully automated. Conversely, the laggards are the ones that have not automated anything at all. That's their term, not mine. And then you have the middle-of-the-road folks. But if we take a look at a compare and contrast between a best-in-class AP organization, which everyone wants to strive to be as much as they can, when we take a look at the first benchmark, right, and it's invoice cycle time. How long does it take for you to process an invoice? And for those that are fully automated, they're doing it in under 3 days from the time they receive an invoice till the time it's vouchered. And, a percentage of those invoices will go straight through. So that's as instantaneous as instant can be. But even the ones that need exception handling, the ones that need to be routed for approval because they're not based on a purchase order, right, through workflow, through automation, they were able to get those through the approval cycle and the review process a lot quicker than the companies that are either shuffling paper, maybe using just email to correspond with approvals and having an inability to track and see where things are. So cycle time, and that really is going to allow you to chase after those early pay discounts, conversely avoid late fees and being put on the naughty list with your suppliers. What about just the cost to process an invoice? Cost is made up of labor, cost is made up of time spent, cost is made up of a lot of different things, and that best-in-class AP organization is processing invoices at a cost of $3.34 versus almost $17 for the laggard organizations without automation. So jumps out off the page. If you were just to take your annual invoice volume and extrapolate that out, what would that number look like to you? Then you can dive into the details of that afterwards. Going back to those early pay discounts, even the best-in-class organizations do not capture 100% of those discounts, but 90%, right? So 90% of the early pay discounts available, what does that equate to from a dollar savings your organization. So benchmarks to leverage, good starting point, gets the wheels turning. You'll have to put your own business case together with your own numbers and metrics. We could help you with that as well, of course, but giving you a feel for some of the good benchmarks to follow. So let's talk about some challenges in accounts payable automation. Again, some of these might resonate for you. It all goes back to what you do today. What you do today is either document paper-based, using email. It's not leveraging workflow. So, when you think about your own business process today, where are your challenges? Do invoices need to be routed throughout multiple levels of approval? Managers, directors, VPs, executives. Do the individuals who approve invoices, are those people different from those that might GL code an invoice? What happens when people are out of the office? Do you have a complex business process with different types of invoices that you might process for different companies within your organizations or different business units within your organizations? Over to the right-hand middle slide, the supplier using a different part number than what you might issue on your purchase order. That presents a lot of challenges, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Likewise, the middle bottom square, quantities are different than the invoice quantities. Do you order in eaches and they invoice you in boxes or cases? Whatever unit of measure is on your purchase order, do they invoice you in a different unit of measure? That has downstream impacts on trying to figure out a two-way match or a three-way match. So a lot of challenges there. Again, if you take a look at those and think about what yours might be, we're trying to bring to the table a solution that meets all these challenges and helps you automate the process. So what does that process look like? How do you receive your invoices from your suppliers? Right? Do they send you invoices in the mail? Do they send you a majority via email? Are you still receiving some via fax? However those invoices come into you, you want to get those into IntelliChief right away, very beginning of the process, because that's going to increase your opportunity for automation. That's going to increase your visibility on how the process is performing. So oftentimes, you will have a departmental accounts payable email address that you instruct your suppliers to send invoices to. And so IntelliChief will monitor that email address and automatically import those invoices into workflow without an end user having to do anything. So, of course, anything that comes in the mail will have to be, paper will have to be dropped into a scanner so that that scanner can create the image. But once that's done, that invoice image would end up in workflow and can go through the rest of the process. So once that invoice is an image within the IntelliChief system, you really have two things working simultaneously. That invoice is stored in the document repository within IntelliChief. So you have instant access to it. You can see the history associated with it, full audit and tracking, and it really becomes your electronic filing cabinet, moving away from paper-based filing. And at the same time, that document, that invoice is making its way through workflow. So it's eliminating the paper shuffle, right? We're going to talk about eliminating the data entry, eliminating the manual approvals, and letting the automation and the workflow take control of that based on your business rules. So document management plus workflow is sort of happening right away. From a workflow perspective, sort of the first step in that process is this concept of optical character recognition, or OCR, is probably how you refer to it as. And when you think about that, what it's really doing is taking that invoice image and it's converting it to text so that that text can be extracted off of the document, and then the IntelliChief system can do something with that text, right? So text by itself is not where the intelligence is in the solution, right? It's validating that that information is then accurate. So if we take a look here at IntelliChief, you can see this is really a screenshot of what should be happening under the covers without any end user intervention. So you have the invoice that came in on the right, and the system extracted, IntelliChief extracted all of the data and populated fields on the left. All of this data will be used to not only voucher the invoice into JD Edwards without any data entry, but this data will be used to index and file the document away in the document repository. All of this data is reportable. Any of this data can be used to drive the invoice through workflow based on rules. But you see all those fields on the left in blue, that means all that data has been validated in real time up against your tables in JD Edwards, validated in real time against any business rules that you have. So is the supplier valid? Are the payment terms on the invoice what we have in JD Edwards? Two-way match, three-way match at the line level, that's all part of validation. You can see one field in red, that's the invoice number. What that's telling us here is that this is actually a duplicate invoice, right? So if the data can't be validated, or if there's an issue that needs exception handling, it's going to get flagged and it's get routed through workflow. So you're really not going to see these invoices or have to touch them unless there's an issue, right? If there's no issue, then they should be able to go straight through, which is what we talked about a little while ago. So OCR is going to extract that data off the invoice. Workflow rules are going to be in place for the validation, and the invoices will continue through the process. All of that data will update the document repository so that the invoice is filed away now based on information. When we talk about any invoices that are purchase order back, IntelliChief will perform a two-way match, a three-way match, potentially a four-way match if you're doing one against a quality receiver or some other data. And as long as that invoice passes your match criteria or falls within whatever tolerance you allow, the data from that invoice will go from IntelliChief to JD Edwards without you having to do anything, and that's where you get your automation, your straight-through processing. Any invoices that are not based on a purchase order, and for that matter, the ones that need exception handling, those are going to get routed through workflow. And so based on whatever thresholds of approval, dollar limit, business unit, department, however those invoices need to get routed to be coded and approved, they'll make their way through workflow in IntelliChief. And on the left-hand side, we can see an inbox structure of a particular user in IntelliChief. So documents basically move in and out of inboxes based on the stage that they're in, and users can do their work out of these inboxes. So workflow will route those to the appropriate person for coding and approval, and then that data will make its way to JD Edwards. Here's an example of an invoice in workflow that a user has opened up, and it was routed to them, and it's, whatever the instruction is for that user at the time, they'll be prompted. So you sort of see this dialog box in the middle with some of the yellow background. And so when a user is routed an invoice or any document, they're prompted with a question or instructions. In this case, has this invoice been successfully matched? And there's a drop down. So you can provide not only questions, but selected drop down responses so that the user can interact with that invoice, that document. So if it was routed for approval, it just might be very simply, do you approve this invoice? And the drop down would be yes or no. And depending on their response, it will move to the next stage in the workflow process. And so then we're going to talk about integration in a minute, but at the end of the process, IntelliChief is going to pass that data to JD Edwards to create the voucher through our integration that we have developed. So let's talk about integration with JD Edwards. There are different integration points, but just to rewind, right, this is the value of this Oracle partnership that we have, right? So it's all about integration, and you really don't want a standalone silo of document management and workflow that's not integrated with JD Edwards. There's too much codependency between the two systems that needs to happen in order to become a best-in-class AP organization. So integration is critical. One of the first points of integration that I've already alluded to is a real-time lookup to the JD Edwards tables. Why would you want to have a real-time lookup between IntelliChief and JD Edwards? It starts with validation of that invoice data, right? So when we identify who the supplier is, or we identify what the payment terms are on the invoice, or whether this invoice matches the purchase order and the receipt, right? We want to take that information off of the invoice and we want to validate it against what's in JD Edwards. And we want to do that in real time. And that's really important on the receiving side of things. I think we'll talk about that in a minute. There's also the requirement to access information that's not on the invoice. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, is the supplier number on the invoice? Probably not. Is the buyer or the buyer number on an invoice? Maybe not. Right. So what happens if that invoice does not match the PO? What do you do with it in your business process? Maybe you route it to the buyer in purchasing to resolve it. Well, if IntelliChief can do a lookup to JD Edwards based on the purchase order number and identify who the buyer is, that invoice could be automatically routed to the buyer without any user intervention. Supplier number, doing a lookup to pull that back, it's a great way to index the invoice, not just based on supplier name, but supplier number. And this additional data can be used to drive your workflow routing in addition to document indexing. And all this information, all this index information is reportable within the IntelliChief system. And also real-time lookups to do GL coding, right? So for those invoices not based on a purchase order, someone might have to code those invoices. So being able to do a lookup interactively or automatically to JD Edwards to apply the correct GL codes is important. And not just for non-PO invoices, but your PO-based invoices that might have shipping, tax, freight, right? These other special charges. And if those charges are not on your purchase order, they've got to be coded. And so that can happen automatically through a rule, or it could happen interactively, but the lookup plays a critical factor there. And the other point of integration I want to touch on today is the export of this invoice data to get it into JD Edwards. So you don't have to do the data entry, and you can have that voucher creation automatically. And so we've developed an integration module for JD Edwards. This one specifically that I'm talking about now is for Enterprise One. We also have an integration for JD Edwards World, but our Enterprise One integration leverages the JD Edwards Business Services, right, BSSV, and there are specific business services that are offered for vouchering and invoice. There are really two, and we've created a custom one. So there's a business service for purchase order-based invoices, and we leverage that. And there's a business service for non-purchase order-based invoices. And this is the recommended Oracle approach for doing this, and that's what we built the integration on. But those two business services, in particular, the process voucher match for the PO base, was missing some really important functionality that most customers in the field need. And so we created a custom business service with this additional advanced functionality, which supports things like when you receive an invoice and it's for multiple purchase orders, invoice for multiple purchase orders, and they're for multiple business units or companies. There's a whole laundry list of things that we did in that custom business service to support the real-world intricacies of processing invoices and matching. So we could dive into that offline. Really good stuff. Gives you something to think about. So all of this data is going to be passed to JD Edwards using these business services. It's actually going to be passed to a documented interface. So IntelliChief is not writing directly to the tables in JD Edwards. That is where you get into corrupting databases. So we don't want to do that. So we use the documented JD Edwards interface. That interface then takes that data, loads it into JD Edwards, and IntelliChief will get immediate feedback, success or failure of the receipt of that information. So it closes the loop. So bringing the webinar home today, down the stretch here, we want to talk about some critical aspects of an AP automation solution, invoice matching and GL coding and approvals. And so let's talk about each of those. Let's start with invoice matching. First thing to understand is that a two-way match or a three-way match, four-way match for that matter, is being done by the IntelliChief system, leveraging data that IntelliChief has, right? Information off the invoice, for example, plus information that's in your Enterprise One environment, purchase order data, receipt data, and so forth. So IntelliChief's going to identify all of the key fields that are needed to perform your invoice match. IntelliChief, within our own workflow, will even keep track of open PO quantities and receiving quantities, because as if an invoice does not match, you'll have visibility to that in IntelliChief workflow, and you'll be able to see all that information in real time because IntelliChief is doing those lookups up to JD Edwards. We want to make sure that IntelliChief is only passing valid invoice data, invoices that are able to be vouchered to JD Edwards. And we'll support multiple match methods, right? So We can do exact match. We can do first in, first out. We can do a combination. We can apply a dollar amount or a percentage variance to be based on the type of invoice. So that's invoice matching. Some challenges that you might often see, we see them in working with companies like yourself, that your suppliers often do a few different things, right? They'll send you an invoice before the goods are received, right? So you can't really do much with that. They invoice you for items that you ordered, but they use a different item number on their invoice than what was on your purchase order. I alluded to that earlier, as well as invoicing you for different units of measure, different quantity of items than what was on your purchase order, right? And so you really need to look for a solution that handles these things. First one, that invoice, a lot of times you get it via email, the day you place the order, day after, right? But those items don't arrive. They don't arrive for days or weeks or even longer. So that invoice can't be matched, and your team is often manually checking JD hours. Have goods been received? Can we process the invoice? And it presents a lot of challenges. But with IntelliChief, if you think back to those real-time lookups that I mentioned earlier, IntelliChief's going to monitor for when those items are received, and then at that point, attempt to perform the match and process the invoice. So you don't have to manage that manually at all. Within workflow, invoices that come in when there are no receipts will be placed into inboxes called invoices waiting receipts, right? So they'll sit there, and you'll have visibility. How many are there? How long have they been there? But you don't have to go in there and check and work those. Once the invoice, once those goods have been received, IntelliChief is constantly checking JD hours. And once those goods have been received, IntelliChief will pull that invoice out of invoices waiting receipts automatically, and it will attempt to perform the match for you. So it's going to automate that entire process. Second challenge we mentioned was the item cross-reference, right? So that item cross-reference table that you have in JD Edwards for part numbers, so that you can match your part number with the suppliers when you order the same widget or part, whatever it is, right? But what we find is a lot of companies out there are not maintaining that, updating it, maybe not even using it at all. So I would ask you that question, are you maintaining that table? A lot of solutions out there in marketplace only compare raw data, right? They only look at what's on the invoice, and if what's on the invoice doesn't match what's on the PO, for example, the invoice stops and someone's going to manually touch it. And so what IntelliChief has the capability to do is not only read your JD Edwards cross-reference table during the match process, but if you don't use that, IntelliChief has its own cross-reference table that you can populate. So that as you're ordering part number 12345 and they invoice you for part number 54321, when in reality it's the same part, you don't have to, if you're not using the cross-reference table in JD Edwards, IntelliChief is still going to be able to automate that, identify that it matches so that your end users don't have to touch it, and more importantly, it doesn't get rejected in the match process in JD Edwards. And so here you can see, apologize for that, here you can see a screenshot of IntelliChief. And this is showing it to you. Not having seen a demo, it might not make a lot of sense, but down, you see three lines down in the bottom of that screen. Those are lines that have been automatically matched between your PO and your invoice. But there's one line up on the upper left that's highlighted, the coupling, right? That was on the invoice. And you can see the item number, 1100-CP. Your PO data is on the right. That's PO data from JD Edwards, and it's showing it doesn't match, right? Your PO was for 1100-MM. So you could manually, as an AP person, manually match those lines and then be prompted. IntelliChief will prompt you, well, do you want to add that item ID to the cross-reference table for the next time? And if you say yes, the next time you order 1100-MM from this supplier and they invoice you for 1100-CP, it won't even stop. It'll automatically match those lines and push it through. Unit of measure, right? You issue a purchase order out of JD Edwards for 100 items at 20 cents each. That supplier invoices you for 100 items at 20 cents each. Perfect, right? That's an exact match. That's comparing raw data between what was in JD Edwards in the purchase order tables and what was on the invoice. But the reality is that supplier might invoice you any one of these other ways. right? They might send you an invoice for a quantity of 4. Does a quantity of 4 equal 100? Well, no, it doesn't, unless there's 25 in a case and they're invoicing you per case, right? Or they're invoicing you 50 per pair. So there are unit of measure discrepancies that your team might be doing by hand, looking at, having to interact with and figure out. IntelliChief has algorithms running behind the scenes to identify that a quantity of 4 with 25 each is the same thing as a quantity of 100 and automatically processing that match for you. So the results, if you take a look, this is just a sample set of invoices with one of our customers who was doing some testing on this feature. And prior to deploying it, 260 invoices, only 141 went straight through. But when they implemented that item cross-reference and the unit of measure, 254 went straight through. Right? So you're not just automating, you're maximizing the amount of automation. I mentioned earlier special charges, shipping, tax, freight on your PO-based invoices. This is another important consideration, right? If those have to be GL coded. So in that same workflow screen in IntelliChief, you can see all the lines that match between the invoice and the PO. But up above, there was an item on the invoice for sales tax and it wasn't on your purchase order. Not uncommon, right? But what do you have to do with that? Do you have to code it? Well, IntelliChief could factor in a business rule to automatically apply the GL code. Otherwise, it's presented here for the end user who could interactively GL code that sales tax, and they could even leverage a lookup to JD Edwards to do that. On the non-PO-based invoice side, they've got to be coded, they've got to be approved, right? So we want to make sure that workflow and the business rules within IntelliChief enforce your approval hierarchy, right? Making sure there are reminders for people who don't necessarily approve their invoices on time. Want to make sure that through mobile access, when they're not in the office, that they can still access those invoices and approve them or reject them or do whatever they need to do, right? Having instant access to those documents remotely, again, even in this time of working from home and not being able to go into the office, is huge, right? And GL coding, for those that might have to do that out at the branch level or the department level or various locations, they can do that as well. And none of these users, by the way, have to have JD Edwards access, right? Because this is all within IntelliChief workflow. So you don't have to have access to JD Edwards in order to approve an invoice. You can do it directly from IntelliChief. And visibility into related documents, right? It's not just about the invoice. I mentioned the document repository and the electronic filing cabinet. Well, having a packet of information, not just the invoice, but the purchase order, any email correspondence, the receiving documents, a copy of the payment, the check, or the ACH transaction, all filed electronically and linked together, gives you instant access, complete 360-degree view, allows for production of documents electronically in event of an audit. So just wanted to make sure we showed you that as well. So did my best to keep it to a half hour. We're right up against the mark, just a minute or two over. But in summary, right, what we've talked about or tried to provide to you here today is when you think about AP automation, it's not just, hey, we want to approve invoices or we want to eliminate the data entry. You first of all, as a JD Edwards customer, you're going to need a very formal multi-point integration, right? Lookups, getting the data in there in real time, some of those things we talked about. A two-way match and a three-way match sometimes isn't as simple as it sounds, right? There are complexities involved. And if you can't handle those complexities, you're not going to reach the level of automation that you expected to. And expectations are a big part of success or failure of a project like this. So unit of measure, identification and conversion, cross-reference table for the item numbers, just being able to focus on those advanced features that will allow you to truly maximize that automation, which we've developed through that custom business service. And go back to that first slide, that expansion, right? Because you might be here representing accounts payable and wanting to do this in AP, but what about other departments and processes within your company or within your organization? Is there a customer service function? Is there a human resources function? Even within accounting, journal entries, just storing documents, right? Where else can you leverage a solution like this and leverage these sorts of capabilities is something you want to think about. So next step, within the GoToWebinar, there is a handout panel. And if you click on the handouts panel, there's a buyer's guide in there that talks about automation for JD Edwards customers. It's a really good document. I suggest that you pull that out of the handouts and download it. If you have a problem with it, we can shoot you one via email, but download that buyer's guide for sure. A lot of good content in there. Secondly, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you. If you either have any questions you want to take offline, if you want to do a deeper dive into any of these topics that we talked about today, or maybe you've got a project that you're planning for in 2021, or you've got some challenges you want to talk about and see if they match up with what a solution like IntelliChief can bring to the table, happy to do that, get you in touch with the right person who can help you out. So we would love to hear from you. My contact information is up there on the screen. So feel free to reach out to me via email, via phone, and I'll take your call, answer your questions, or like I said, I'll forward you to the right person on the team here who can help you out. Again, this session has been recorded, so we can get you the link to the recording if anyone would like it. And in the meantime, I will take a pause. And if anyone wants to submit any questions into the questions panel within GoToWebinar, I'd be happy to answer those for you. I'll take a look at those. So I'll just take a pause for a minute and give you time to type some questions in there. All right, there is one question, so hopefully there will be more, but I'll just take them as they come. So the first question, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's asking about business case and justification from the beginning of the presentation, and what sort of resources IntelliChief has to help you to build that out. We've got a pretty robust return on investment calculator that takes into consideration a lot of factors, not just invoice volume and number of people, but your early pay discounts and various manual tasks that your team might perform. And it really takes a look at analyzing those numbers, not just what you do today, but what you might project over the next 5 years. So for example, if you're anticipating growth in volume, if you're anticipating having to add people to the team, and it will project that 5-year savings for you and weigh that up against the cost of implementing a solution. And it might be a good worthwhile exercise to collaborate on that calculator with you. The other thing that we really like to do is dive in one-on-one through some very detailed analysis and discovery of your business process, so that we can understand what you're looking for, help you identify gaps and areas where you might benefit from. So I think just through engagement and discussion and leveraging a tool like that, you'd be able to put your business case together or identify what the impact to your organization would be. Another question in there is asking about how long it takes to implement IntelliChief. That varies. That's a very common question, and so I'm going to waffle on that. I mean, we've had projects that start to finish are done in 2 months. I think that's extremely aggressive and probably not the norm. I would say that most customers will implement AP automation more in a 3 to 4 month time frame. Complex projects can certainly stretch beyond that. We have a package for JD Edwards that we've put together for JD Edwards customers. So a bunch of best practices rolled in. It's really designed to get you up and going quickly, and then from there making changes to accommodate unique one-off instances and things like that. So we could talk to you about implementation time frame more when we understand what your scope is and the complexities of your process, and help you out at that point. And it does not look like there are any other questions. Let me just do a quick double check. No, I do not see any. So quiet group today. That's fine. I appreciate everyone's attendance. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. And again, feel free to reach out if you think we can be of any assistance or you want to talk further about automating accounts payable. Thank you very much.